Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The hidden drain of emotional encounters. Most people can recall someone who leaves them mysteriously tired after even the briefest conversation. You begin the day balanced and alert, but after 10 minutes with that colleague, neighbor, or relative, your chest feels heavy and your thoughts dull. It is as if an invisible hand has siphoned away your inner vitality. These encounters accumulate until fatigue becomes the normal atmosphere of daily life. We have given this experience many names. Online culture calls such figures toxic people or energy vampires, and it offers endless quick-fix advice: carry protective crystals, take salt baths, imagine spheres of white light, or simply cut people off. Some of these practices may soothe the surface, but they rarely touch the root. They treat exhaustion as a contagion transmitted by others, never as a symptom of something within us that resonates with them. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, mystic, and pioneer of depth psychology, saw the situation differently. He suggested that what we perceive as drainage originates not primarily in the other person but inside the hidden architecture of our own psyche. What is really happening, he wrote, is a process he called psychic contamination, an unconscious fusion of emotional fields between two individuals. When we meet someone, our inner atmosphere mingles with theirs like two clouds colliding. If both are stable, nothing dramatic occurs. But when one carries unresolved fear, guilt, or dependency and the other has a matching wound, a subtle chemical reaction begins. Energy starts to flow, but it flows one way. Jung's explanation is uncomfortable because it removes the convenient villain. Instead of a vampire lurking outside, he shows us a door left ajar inside ourselves. Those who constantly feel depleted are often people who learned early in life to connect through suffering. As children, they discovered that caring for an anxious parent, calming an angry father, or pleasing everyone in the room brought approval, or at least reduced chaos. Love became tied to responsibility, comfort to self-erasure. That pattern hardens invisibly and, in adulthood, they attract companions who replay the same emotional script. A friend who always needs rescuing, a partner trapped in drama, a colleague addicted to crisis, they find one another by unconscious design. The helper feels useful, compassionate, even virtuous, yet underneath lies an ancient fear: if I stop helping, I will not be loved. The result is a slow, almost imperceptible leak of psychic energy. Jung observed that such leaks occur through the weakest region of personality, what he called the inferior function, the part of us least developed, least conscious, and therefore most vulnerable to outside influence. Through this crack, the unresolved emotions of others slip in unnoticed. The thinker absorbs another's chaos, the empath takes on another's despair. Because the intrusion mirrors something latent within, it feels strangely familiar, even justified. We mistake contagion for compassion. Modern society reinforces the confusion. We are praised for self-sacrifice, told that good people listen endlessly, forgive instantly, and stay calm no matter what storms rage around them. But unexamined virtue can become a form of blindness. Each time we ignore the inner signal, tight chest, drained mood, the instinct to step back, we surrender another fragment of autonomy. Soon we begin to believe fatigue is the price of kindness. Yet Jung's view offers hope precisely because it calls for awareness rather than blame. If the exhaustion begins inside, then so can the cure. Instead of demonizing the toxic other, we can ask deeper questions. What in me responds so strongly to their need? What emotion of mine do they awaken? Why does helping them feel compulsory rather than free? These questions mark the first steps toward psychological hygiene. The truth is that every relationship is an exchange of unseen substances. When our own emotional boundaries are undefined, we unconsciously open ourselves to carry the unresolved stories of others. It is not witchcraft or karma, it is resonance. Two frequencies meeting, one amplifying the other until both vibrate in the same painful note. Recognizing this dynamic does not mean we must withdraw from the world. It means learning to stay connected without dissolving. It means understanding that compassion without consciousness becomes contamination. The task is not to fear others, but to know ourselves so well that no hidden wound can be used as a doorway again. Thus, the mystery of feeling drained is not supernatural at all. It is psychological, symbolic, and deeply human. Every time you walk away from someone feeling emptied, you are being invited, not punished, to see where your own energy still leaks, where an old pattern of saving, pleasing, or enduring still governs you. Only by noticing this can real transformation begin. In the chapters ahead, we will follow Jung's map more closely. We'll examine how psychic contamination operates, how the inferior function becomes the entry point for manipulation, how the shadow hides in the people we dislike, and finally, how true energetic protection is achieved, not through isolation, but through integration. Because the greatest shield is not armor. It is awareness. The wounded helper and psychic contamination. If Chapter 1 revealed that emotional exhaustion often begins within, this next step takes us deeper, into the hidden structure that makes some people perpetual targets of psychic depletion. Jung called it psychic contamination, but behind that clinical term lies a profoundly human story, the story of the wounded helper. From early childhood, many sensitive individuals learn to measure love by how much pain they can absorb. In families marked by neglect, volatility, or silence, a child quickly senses that peace depends on them, on their ability to soothe, to fix, to anticipate others' needs. When they succeed, they feel momentarily safe. When they fail, they feel worthless. Thus begins the unconscious equation: to be loved, I must heal others. That small, frightened pattern grows into an adult identity, what society applauds as the good listener, reliable friend, or selfless partner. Yet beneath these noble masks hides a compulsion. Such people are not merely helping, they are maintaining psychic equilibrium, defending against an old terror that love might vanish if they stop giving. Jung would say their compassion is shadowed by fear. Now picture what happens when the wounded helper meets a person overflowing with unresolved emotion, a chronic victim, a manipulator, a dramatic relative who thrives on crisis. An invisible bridge forms instantly. The other's chaos resonates with the helper's inner programming, and energy begins to flow from one psyche to the other. It feels noble to be there for someone, but soon the helper's body tightens, their mind fogs, and fatigue settles in. Still, they can't step away. The old reflex whispers, if I leave, I'll be bad. If I stop listening, they'll suffer. This is psychic contamination at work. It isn't magic, it's resonance between two unconscious complexes. The victim projects their pain outward, and the helper's unhealed need to rescue catches it like a radio frequency. Both think they are engaged in empathy, but psychologically it is fusion, the boundaries between self and other blur. Jung compared it to two rivers meeting, the stronger current always carries the weaker one. The tragedy is that the helper often believes exhaustion is proof of goodness. They wear their tiredness like a medal of moral virtue. I'm just too empathetic, they say, not realizing empathy without awareness becomes self-erasure. Real compassion feels light, false compassion feels heavy. The difference lies in consciousness. Jung noticed that these patterns are rooted in what he termed the inferior function, the weakest, least developed aspect of personality. Each of us leads with one dominant function, thinking, feeling, sensing, or intuition, while another remains neglected, childlike, and easily overwhelmed. Through this blind spot, contamination enters. The thinker who disowns emotion is drained by others' moods. The feeler who avoids logic is manipulated by clever arguments. The intuitive who neglects the senses becomes lost in fantasy. The sensing type who avoids introspection is swallowed by another's intensity. The key is not to suppress the inferior function but to develop it, for whatever remains unconscious becomes a portal for invasion. Jung warned that when we fail to own our weak points, we unknowingly offer them to others to play out for us. Thus, life seems filled with toxic people, but they are only acting the part of our unintegrated selves. Imagine two actors on a stage. One plays the rescuer, the other the victim. The script repeats until one of them refuses the role. The moment the helper sees the pattern and steps off stage, the play collapses. That is how psychic healing begins, not through confrontation, but through withdrawal of unconscious participation. Yet withdrawing isn't easy. The body trembles, guilt rises. Saying no feels cruel, even dangerous. But this tremor is not proof of error, it is the nervous system unlearning decades of conditioning. Jung called such moments individuation in progress, the psyche reorganizing itself toward wholeness. So, the next time you leave a conversation feeling inexplicably empty, pause before blaming the other person. Ask instead, what in me needed to be drained? Perhaps the exhaustion is a message from the self, asking you to stop living through borrowed emotions. The people who sap you may be showing, through discomfort, the exact place where your own boundary still leaks. To recognize this is not self-blame, it is self-reclamation. The energy vampire is only half the story. The other half is the wound within us that invites them in. Awareness closes the circuit. With every moment of honest observation, you begin to retrieve fragments of energy once scattered in 100 emotional debts. In truth, no one can steal your energy without your unconscious permission. The task is not to harden or isolate, but to become inwardly solid, to feel fully without fusing, to care without collapsing. Once you see how psychic contamination works, the illusion of the vampire fades. What remains is clarity, and from clarity comes peace. The inferior function, your psyche's open door. Every personality has its fortress and its gate. The fortress is built from our strongest qualities, the talents we polish, the traits that win approval. The gate, though, is less visible, a fragile opening through which everything foreign can slip in. Carl Jung called this opening the inferior function, the weakest, least developed of the four psychological functions that structure human consciousness: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. To understand psychic exhaustion, we must first understand this hidden gate. When one function dominates our life, the opposite side remains neglected, immature, and therefore easily influenced. A thinker, proud of logic, represses emotion; a feeler, guided by empathy, neglects analysis; a sensor trusts only the concrete and fears imagination; an intuitive lives in symbols but forgets the body. What we disown does not vanish, it becomes an unguarded threshold between our mind and the world. Jung likened the inferior function to a half-open door between the conscious and the unconscious. It is unstable, reactive, and strangely magnetic to outside energies. Whenever we meet someone whose emotional pattern matches what we have suppressed, their energy flows directly through this door. The result feels like invasion, but in truth it is resonance. Picture a man whose dominant function is thinking, precise, methodical, unemotional. His inferior function is feeling, the territory he least understands. He meets a woman whose moods swing wildly between dependency and accusation. He tries to reason with her, to analyze, to fix. But gradually her emotions penetrate his inner wall, his thoughts blur, his chest tightens, his nights fill with restless dreams. He feels drained yet compelled to stay. What has happened is simple. Her chaos has entered the very part of him he never learned to manage. His energy now sustains her unprocessed emotions while his own psyche weakens. The mechanism repeats endlessly across relationships. A person whose dominant feeling is unguarded against manipulation by cold rationalists who twist logic to justify abuse. A grounded, sensory type becomes hypnotized by an intuitive visionary who promises meaning but offers only confusion. Each one is exploited precisely where they are undeveloped. The vampire does not break in, we leave the window open. What makes this dynamic dangerous is that it rarely feels wrong at first. The inferior function carries a childlike fascination. It is the unknown part of ourselves that secretly longs to grow. Thus, the thinker feels drawn to the emotional partner, the intuitive to the practical friend, the feeler to the intellectual mentor. The attraction is magnetic because it carries the promise of wholeness. But when consciousness is low, what should be growth becomes consumption. Instead of integrating the missing quality, we surrender our energy to it in someone else. Jung warned that as long as the inferior function remains unconscious, it acts like an inner spy, handing our vitality to those who know how, even instinctively, to press its buttons. Manipulators need no formal training, their unconscious simply recognizes the open wound in ours. One careless phrase, a sigh of disappointment, and guilt rushes in. A single accusation, you don't care about me, and the helper collapses into overgiving. That is the power of the inferior function when left in shadow. The remedy is not to build higher walls but to educate the gatekeeper. We strengthen the inferior function through awareness, practice, and humility. The thinker must descend into feeling, naming emotions instead of dissecting them. The feeler must learn to think critically, testing beliefs before surrendering. The intuitive must ground visions in physical action, the sensor must allow imagination to speak. Each small effort closes the psychic gap through which others once entered. This work is uncomfortable because it goes against nature. The psyche prefers the familiar pattern, the thinker thinking, the feeler feeling, the rescuer rescuing. But comfort is the price of weakness. To become whole, we must engage the neglected function until it grows strong enough to stand beside the dominant one. Then energy, once lost to imbalance, begins to circulate inwardly again. When the inferior function is integrated, the old relationships shift. The people who thrived on your confusion lose their grip, often without conflict. Their hooks can no longer find purchase. You still feel compassion, but not compulsion. Their storms no longer enter your weather. It is as if the once open door has become a clear window, you can see through, yet nothing passes without your consent. Developing this inner stability is the first true act of psychic protection. Rituals may calm the mind for a moment, but only integration transforms the structure itself. When all four functions begin to cooperate, energy no longer leaks outward, it flows in a balanced circuit. The thinker feels, the feeler reasons, the sensor imagines, the intuitive acts. And from that harmony arises a quiet immunity, an invisible strength that neither drama nor manipulation can penetrate. In the next chapter, we'll journey deeper still, into the twilight chamber of the shadow, the hidden counterpart of the self that fuels these patterns from beneath consciousness. Because even when the inferior function is guarded, the shadow remains waiting in the dark, eager to project its unclaimed truths onto the faces around us. The shadow you've been avoiding. Once the inferior function is recognized, another, even darker layer begins to emerge. It is what Carl Jung called the shadow, the hidden twin of the conscious personality, the part of ourselves we spend a lifetime denying. To encounter it is uncomfortable, even frightening, because it holds everything we refuse to admit about who we are. Yet Jung insisted that until we meet this buried half, we will remain trapped in endless repetitions of psychic exhaustion. The shadow is not evil in itself, it is simply unlived life. It contains every impulse, emotion, and quality that our social identity has repressed in order to appear good, strong, or spiritual. The anger we call inappropriate, the envy we disguise as moral opinion, the desire for control that we hide beneath kindness, all of these exiled fragments accumulate in the unconscious. And the more we deny them, the more power they acquire. When we refuse to look inward, the psyche compensates by projecting the shadow outward. Suddenly, other people seem to carry everything we cannot face. The manipulative colleague, the arrogant friend, the needy partner, each one becomes a living screen for our disowned traits. We despise in them what we secretly fear in ourselves. Jung wrote that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The shadow doesn't shout, it mirrors. This mirroring explains why certain individuals affect us so strongly. We tell ourselves that their behavior drains us, that they are toxic, that they disturb our peace. But in reality, their presence activates a part of us we have long buried. They stir the emotional sediment at the bottom of the soul. The exhaustion we feel afterward is not only from contact with them, it's from the effort of suppressing what their reflection awakens. We are not merely tired, we are resisting ourselves. Consider the person who prides themselves on endless patience and gentleness. When they encounter anger in another, they recoil, calling it aggressive or draining. Yet that reaction may be their own repressed fury seeking recognition. Or the moralist who detests manipulators might secretly use guilt to control others, though never consciously. Projection is the shadow's favorite disguise. It allows us to condemn from a safe distance what we still embody unconsciously. The true weariness of psychic contamination arises here, in the tension between the persona we show and the shadow we hide. The more we insist on being perfectly kind, reasonable, and spiritual, the more energy we expend holding the mask in place. Each encounter with someone who exposes our cracks becomes a battle to maintain the illusion. Fatigue, irritability, guilt, and anxiety are simply the body's way of signaling, enough pretending. Jung taught that freedom begins when we have the courage to withdraw our projections, to recognize that what disturbs us outside points toward what is unhealed within. This is not self-blame, it is self-ownership. It means standing before the mirror without judgment and saying, yes, that too is me. Only then can the scattered fragments of personality begin to integrate. But integration demands humility. It requires giving up the comfort of victimhood. As long as we see ourselves as the one who is drained, we remain innocent and powerless. The moment we admit that we are also, at times, the drainer, the manipulator, the avoider, the pretender, something profound shifts. We stop fighting the image and start learning from it. Awareness, not perfection, is the goal. Opus Contra Naturam, the work against nature. When Carl Jung spoke of psychological transformation, he often used an alchemical phrase, opus contra naturam, the work against nature. It sounds mysterious, but his meaning was precise. Nature, in this context, is not forests or rivers, it is the automatic machinery of our psyche, the set of emotional reflexes and habits that keep us repeating the same patterns. To work against nature is to move consciously where instinct would prefer comfort, to bring light into the parts of the mind that resist awareness. After confronting the shadow, the next challenge is persistence. Insight alone changes little. The unconscious will always try to pull us back toward the familiar. The psyche loves inertia. It clings to the old identity, the rescuer, the victim, the people-pleaser, because those roles once ensured survival. Breaking them feels like treason against one's own history. Yet this rebellion is the very essence of the Opus Contra Naturam, a deliberate refusal to obey the outdated logic of pain. Every individual must perform this inner alchemy in their own way. For the compulsive giver, the work against nature begins with a single syllable, no, a word that trembles on the lips, because it threatens rejection. For the thinker who hides behind intellect, the task may be to feel, to weep, to rage, to admit vulnerability. For the emotional type ruled by sympathy, the work might be to think clearly, to analyze before absorbing. Each act of conscious reversal is like heating raw material in a crucible. The old structure melts, a new alloy begins to form. Opus Contra Naturam, the work against nature. When Carl Jung spoke of psychological transformation, he often used an alchemical phrase, Opus Contra Naturam, the work against nature. It sounds mysterious, but his meaning was precise. Nature, in this context, is not forests or rivers, it is the automatic machinery of our psyche, the set of emotional reflexes and habits that keep us repeating the same patterns. To work against nature is to move consciously where instinct would prefer comfort, to bring light into the parts of the mind that resist awareness. After confronting the shadow, the next challenge is persistence. Insight alone changes little. The unconscious will always try to pull us back toward the familiar. The psyche loves inertia. It clings to the old identity, the rescuer, the victim, the people-pleaser, because those roles once ensured survival. Breaking them feels like treason against one's own history. Yet this rebellion is the very essence of the Opus Contra Naturam, a deliberate refusal to obey the outdated logic of pain. Every individual must perform this inner alchemy in their own way. For the compulsive giver, the work against nature begins with a single syllable, no, a word that trembles on the lips, because it threatens rejection. For the thinker who hides behind intellect, the task may be to feel, to weep, to rage, to admit vulnerability. For the emotional type ruled by sympathy, the work might be to think clearly, to analyze before absorbing. Each act of conscious reversal is like heating raw material in a crucible. The old structure melts, a new alloy begins to form. Jung compared this process to spiritual metallurgy. The lead of unconscious repetition is placed in the fire of awareness until it becomes gold, integrated consciousness. But the furnace is hot. It burns illusions, defenses, excuses. To endure that heat is painful, which is why so many people stop halfway, returning to the comfort of blaming others. Yet every time we repeat an old role, energy leaks out again. The real fatigue of life does not come from work or duty, it comes from disobeying the soul's demand for evolution. The Opus Contra Naturam demands daily practice. It is not performed in monasteries but in ordinary moments, when you restrain the impulse to rescue someone who has not asked, when you stay silent instead of defending an image, when you pause before reacting to guilt. These tiny victories reshape the psychic structure more effectively than grand rituals. They teach the unconscious that a new order is emerging, one ruled by awareness, not reflex. Why does Jung call it against nature rather than against evil? Because there is nothing demonic about our automatisms, they are simply primitive. They belong to an earlier stage of adaptation, like instinctive muscle memory. The problem arises when those instincts dominate a grown consciousness. To act mechanically is natural, but evolution is never natural. It is painful, intentional, unnatural in the best sense. Consider the caregiver who learns to stop saying yes. At first, their entire nervous system revolts. The body shakes, guilt floods in. The psyche screams, "You're abandoning them." Yet if they hold steady through that storm, something new crystallizes, self-respect. They discover that saying no does not end love, it purifies it. What once drained them now teaches balance. Through countless small transgressions against habit, the center of gravity shifts. The individual who once sought validation externally begins to draw nourishment from within. Jung said that, no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That is the true meaning of protection, not a bubble of energy, but clarity so strong that no projection can take hold. Eventually, a quiet invulnerability arises. It isn't coldness, it's transparency. Emotional vampires, manipulators, even well-meaning dependents find no surface to cling to. They may still speak, but their hooks pass through you like light through glass. You are present, compassionate, yet untouched. The psyche that once leaked energy through weakness now circulates power through wholeness. The Opus Contra Naturam never truly ends. Each new stage of life presents another layer of inertia to overcome. But the more you practice conscious opposition to your old patterns, the more natural it becomes to live unnaturally, that is, to live awake. And from that awakening comes the deepest kind of peace, not the fragile calm of avoidance, but the radiant stillness of integration.